So welcome. My name is Annie Okerlund. I am an adaptive yoga and meditation teacher. I've been teaching yoga since 1999, and I now work solely within the military communities of traumatic injury, amputees, brain injuries, spinal cord injuries, within an organization that I started in 2006 called Exalted Warrior Foundation. In the realm of teaching yoga to humans, I found this practice, iRest Yoga Nidra, in 2010. It was actually first brought to my attention in 2006 when I was working at Walter Reed Army Medical Center in DC. And a wonderful community was brewing there. And they were actually doing a research study with 25 combat injured service members using iRest as a wonderful tool to support nervous system regulation, the effects of traumas of life, and then on top of that, traumatic injury. And what really came to me when I first tried iRest, I had done Yoga Nidra before, but when I first tried iRest, there was several things that really changed my whole experience with it. And one of those things was my inner resource, a place to come back to when I felt completely disconnected, when all of my experience, loss, trauma, my humanity, when I felt disconnected from my humanity, I came back to my inner resource. And you'll hear me talk about it in the practice, and we will get a little bit more time into the idea of the inner resource. But it really brings forefront where we are in our world, what today, May 31st has brought to our communities, especially in the United States, and around the world, but especially honing into the United States. We are at a time where everything feels awful. At least that's how I woke up this morning. The reality that people and humans in my world cannot and are not safe with who they are. And we know from our individual experience that we are challenged in the human condition of finding our way, of finding our heart, and of living our own truth. And I woke up this morning feeling just incredibly overwhelmed by it, and also grateful that I have the tools of my practice. And I'll be honest, I've been working my tools nonstop today, and I woke up with a sense of rage of how can this be happening? What does this mean for my son, for my family, for the people I love who are humans? And along the way in all of this, there's a poignant experience that at times in our lives, we lose our own humanity. And in contemplative practices, we are coming home to our humanity. I was lucky enough to stumble into the Tricycle, which is a beautiful Buddhist meditation community. There's a magazine, and I'm happy to send anybody this article. What was really happening with me, and I wrote it down, was what do we do when we experience life that's not just our own individual experience? And what kept resounding back was we have to drop back into the depths of our own humanity, into the web that we came from that connects us all. And we know from spiders that spider webs are incredibly powerful. And at times when we're feeling disconnected from ourselves, when we're feeling disconnected from our own humanity, we forget that we are in the web of life. And what happens at this little corner, or what happens in my sweet little space, is rippling somehow, ever minutely or very grand, into the rest of humanity and into life. And it's these big, charged, incredibly intense moments like we're in right now that everybody kind of gasps, steps back, and has the dance that the human condition of having a heart with red blood flowing through it, working the internal. We forget that we have the internal, and we become so externalized. I rage cried as I walked today, and I haven't had that experience in a while, but it was just this pure, like, I have to let go. I have to let go of what this feels like in my heart. But the only way that I can do that is to sink deeper into it. And that is so hard. And so I invite you to this practice today. That is why we're here. We are here in any form of contemplative practice to drop in so that we can navigate whatever arises in our experience, the full gamut of emotions, the full gamut of life, the fear of looking out the window and knowing that there's extreme violence happening on our own doorsteps, in our own communities, in protests all over our country. And I'm not a normally very quick to vocalize within political dances. I work in a military setting as a yoga teacher, and those are two very different worlds, but they're not. And they come together so beautifully because two main things, well, the same thing, ultimately, humanity. I'm human, and I want my humanness. My humanness supports your humanness. That's it. All of the labels that are on us externally, mother, daughter, lover, child, teacher, crazy person, whatever, all of that is absolutely mute. It really, really is, because the reality is when we're inside and in our own humanity, that's it. We are connected and we stay that way. This challenge is to stay in our own humanity individually while all of this is going on. And then how do we make change? So I know I'm rambling a little bit. I apologize. So I found this article written, interestingly enough, in 2017 by a wonderful teacher from the Thich Nhat Hanh lineage, Buddhist lineage. He's one of the top teachers there. And he talks about rousing the energy of compassion and insight within us. The Yogacarya tradition offers us some clues and some insights that can help us transform the seeds of racism, confusion, hatred, and greed that lie at the base of our consciousness. These seeds, which all of us have, can be healed and can be transformed through our practice. Our racial samsara lives. It's cultivated and is passed on to future generations through the transmission of these seeds. Now is the time to define ourselves not by our wounds, but by our wholeness. Now is the time to define ourselves not by our disappointment, but by our capacity and our potential to be profoundly human. We need imagination more than ever before to reimagine ourselves, to reimagine our institutions, our communities, and our capacities to be present with compassion and insight for one another. This is the task before us. We must understand ourselves as more than a biological self, understand ourselves as a vast and deep self. And from that vast and deep self, we reinvent what is possible for us, what is possible for generations to come, expand our humanness and our sense of sacredness. This is how we will change our racial samsara and how we will change the world. He goes on to quote a wonderful woman named Grace Lee Boggs, who was an incredible community leader within the feminist movement, as well as an incredible author. She was born in 1915, and she lived till she was 100 in 2015. And she said, in moments like this, these are the times to grow our souls. And then I did a little more research on her, and I found a beautiful quote by her that says, people are aware that they cannot continue in the same old way, but are immobilized because they can't imagine an alternative. We need a vision that recognizes that we are at one of the greatest turning points in human history, when the survival of our planet and the restoration of our humanity require a great sea of change in our ecological, economic, political, and spiritual values. I was extremely moved by reading the full article by Larry Ward, and I will pull it up and put it in the comments. And if you have any questions about that, we can talk about it. And we'll move into practice here probably within the next 10, 15 minutes. I come back to my practice, my IRES practice, and what it has given me more than anything is the ability to drop back, down in all of those words that have nothing to do with the external. They have everything to do with the internal. And as I stated earlier, the external is really scary right now. All of my labels are worried about the future. And having said that, just saying it is a big release, but also as Grace Lee Boggs states, what do we do with that now? The alternative is unimaginable. How do we get there? And one of the pieces that all of my teachers have always taught me is that when change is needed, it has to come from ourselves. Having said that, I wish I could snap my fingers and our entire culture just poof. At the beginning of the pandemic and all of the lockdowns around the world, I sat in on a Dharma talk with a very dear teacher friend of mine who actually lives in Utkarshi, India, up in the Himalayas. He is a monk. He was a former Israeli Special Forces member, became a monk, and is a wonderful, wonderful teacher. And one of the students in the discussion and during his Dharma talk asked him via Instagram Live, technology is amazing, asked him, when are we going to be able to maintain this sense of connection, this sense of community, this sense of we're all in this together when we all begin to come back out of this enclosed space that we're in for the protection of everyone in the world? No, not at all, he said. He said, that's not human nature. And that was so crushing in the reality that, well, if we can't maintain it, we're going back into a pattern that I disagree with wholly. But again, how do we come back into, drop into, rest into the reality that the change has to happen, and it has to happen with us, and that creates the ripple around us. We're an incredibly, incredibly potent moment in our history, but sadly, how many times have we said that? How many times has this happened? How many generations has this happened? And we almost need to look at it from an epigenetic state. What is happening? What is in the trauma DNA changing of our cells that is keeping us locked into this fear and greed and violence and externalized fear-based experience? And that is, I feel from my own experiences, that we're scared to look within. Every single person, all of us, humans, are scared to look within because we've had challenges, and they are life challenges. I may not have the same experiences as my neighbor, but as a human, when I'm dropped in, when I am connected to the deepest roots of my humanity, I can have empathy and understand that this person may need me to just hold space to listen. And there's so much divisive energy in the world. We have to come back to ourselves so we can then launch into creating the space that we want. I appreciate you listening. Having said that, there's times in our practice where we don't want to drop in because we know it's a fearful space from whatever life experience from prior to birth. Maybe it's generational, maybe it's been passed down, traumas, stresses, all of these things. So the beauty I find in my IREST practice is that it offers a place and a stillness that begins to settle into the deepest cell level and to the deepest cell level on a heart level of being absolutely okay. It's not about changing or fixing anything. It's about remembering that deep down, There is an essence that has never been hurt, never been scared, has always known the right thing to do. But life, experience, others, our conditioning, all of that gets layered onto us again and again and again and again, just by being here in the moment that we're in. And we can't change that. We can welcome it. And those are really, really hard things to think about, especially, for example, when I was rage crying while I was walking this morning. It's really hard to sit in it and just feel the ickiness and the fear and the fear on so many levels of violence and of my people, and are my people okay? My people are connected to me all the time. But we forget the width and the breadth and the depth of the web, which we are all connected to. In our practice today, my idea was that we can cultivate the stillness within the practice, and especially our inner resource. I mentioned it earlier. It's a really, really potent part of our practice. Our inner resource within the practice actually becomes something that you can have in your pocket all the time. It is a place where we feel deeply secure.